very warm welcome to Capital Sports 3.0. I'm in a different location this week, and unfortunately, it's just doubling up on our sound. But there you go. That's what we are paid for, or paid not to do. So I'm Alan Moore, and in just a moment, I'm going to go to our brilliant co-hosts who are waiting, and hopefully, we're waiting for Isla to join in as well. But we'll have two superb co-hosts to start out the show with me. In any case. An awful lot on the show today. We have part two of Robin Parisotto. We're going to actually discuss the book he wrote, a book that I guarantee everyone who watches the show would love this book, because it's not only in depth into doping, but it's in depth into the whole psychology surrounding doping, and also, what it takes to win as well, because that's a very, very important thing as well. And a lot of people I know have read this book and sort of figure out how to win clean, which is a very, very good thing as well. So we've got that part two come up in just about 5-10 minutes time. Before we do, of course, we're going to have a little look at football and also speak about the whole transgender debate, because on Friday another blow was given to transgender athletes, and we've discussed it with people here on the show before. Of course, with Kristen Worley, a terrific campaigner, a terrific person who has basically illuminate things for us and basically educate us on the whole rights surrounding transgender athletes. There's a lot of, let's just say, negativity surrounding it now in people, because yesterday, of course, was the day of transgender visibility. And unfortunately, a lot of people use it as a means to beat up people, as in, especially online, and say, no, it's wrong, and, sort of keep them out of sports, so on and so forth. But, we're a little bit better than that here on Capital Sports 3.0. And also then we will go on to speak with Kelly Harrington, because again, she was absolutely ganged up upon last week. It was a disgraceful moment. I think it was shameful for Irish history. That's in my opinion. I was on the way home when I saw it, because Olympic gold medalist, basically when she tried to move on from questions from one interviewer, he refused to let it happen. And well, look, it's a sad moment for Irish sport. We'll have a look at that a little bit later on as well. So in just a moment, I will now bring everyone onto the show. Isolde is here with us. So Isolde, your hair looks great tonight. You washed it.
Oh, now stop it. I did this just for Fiona. I'll hear no other comments.
So, of course, Andrew Flint is there on mute, and Keane McGinley is also on mute. So we're going to start off right away. Isolde, a double whammy for you yesterday. Your Welsh team and your Munster team both hockeyed. Is this end of days for Munster rugby? Can you rebuild from this?
Oh, there's lots of potential in the Munster team to rebuild. Disappointing results. I suppose it's the culmination of a number of difficult weekends out for them. There's a lot of potential in the team. There's a lot of ability to rebuild and build around the talent that they have there, which is undeniably there. I think it's just a question of going away and really examining what's happening, particularly in terms of game management. And I think that's a bigger issue. And that's something that you can always improve with players. When you have the raw talent, it's learning how to use that talent. That's the important thing. And, we obviously have Andrew on the call. That's basically what Ten Hag was almost successfully doing with Man United, with the players he had up until obviously today when they came a cropper.
Yeah, I mean, I think, as you said, game management, if Munster managed not to ship 50 points, that is a very good game. But that is how it goes. Keane, terrible for Munster. And as you said, Arsenal were good yesterday, beating Leeds 4-1. A friend of mine, Colin, who's down in the Canaries right now watching us, he is a big, big Arsenal fan. He said, it's a poor Leeds team. You can only beat what's put in front of you. And definitely, it was a Manchester United performance from the men in red.
Yeah, it was a very poor performance. They've made good steps forward under Graham Rowntree and the coaching team over the last number of months. But the last couple of weeks have probably been very concerning. They conceded over 30 points against the Scarlets in Cork early in the Six Nations in an off weekend. Then were beaten comfortably by Glasgow last weekend in Limerick and conceded a bag full of points that night or last weekend as well, and then conceded heavily again yesterday. It's something that they need to work on. Defensively, they've been an absolute shambles over the last 3 or 4 games. Dennis Leamy has to probably look at the way he's doing things. He's got to probably circle the wagons now. Forget about yesterday. They've got 2 games in South Africa to finish the league campaign. Not an easy thing to do. At least in one respect, they got a look at the way things are out in South Africa. That they've managed to win one game out there in the last couple of seasons. I think from a Munster perspective, if they could manage to win one of the 2 remaining fixtures, that might secure them Champions Cup qualification for next season. So I think that would be a huge achievement for this year. And then they can circle the wagons for the 20th or 30th time in the last 18 or 20 years and rebuild for next season. But it's going to be a very, very difficult couple of weeks for them.
Iseult, if you can tilt sideways, or at least tilt your camera sideways, would be great.
We'll try to do so.
Andrew, what could be next season the Arab Derby between Qatar United and Saudi Celtic? 2-0 today, but it doesn't really make a difference because United are going to get into Europe. And it's just kind of like it's, unfortunately, they've had a few wobbles of late. Still a good side, and they just need to sort of get their mojo back.
Well, look, I've got to look at the season as a whole, comparing this to, and I still can't believe this is still the same season that we're still in at this moment, when we were picked apart by Bournemouth at the beginning of the season, and it was a nightmare. Just the image for me was playing out from the back. Christian Eriksen tried to play it round the corner. It was a new style that we just hadn't played. We looked awful, a mess all over the place. And now look where we are. We're disappointed to be dropping down to 4th, which, if you go even further back, that's a disappointing state of affairs to be. But it is a fact. That is improvement, the fact we're disappointed to be there. But look, the top 4 is shown up. There's nobody below the top 4 who's going to challenge us to get into the Champions League. So we've got that at least to reassure us. But it's starting to sting now, if I'm honest. The Liverpool result, that was just a catastrophic, historically catastrophic collapse, which is you can't avoid it. Now that's 2 main rivals that we've lost to comprehensively. It's quite disappointing. I was hoping at least one of those games, and I knew this would be a big result either way, that we'd be able to say, look, this is what Ten Hag has managed to accomplish. He's got us to a stage where we can dig in. And there used to be the days we'd go to Newcastle and beat them 4-5-0, 6-2. I remember Paul Scholes scored a hat-trick one time. Those days are long gone now. But look, next season, it's still uncertain exactly which state is going to be running Manchester United, if any. So we'll see. I think investment is not the full answer there. I say the full answer. I don't think it is going to change the character of the team. We could bring in, we need a striker. Wout Weghorst is not, well, look, put it this way, when he's on loan from a championship side, that kind of tells the story. He's not the number 9 we need. But I don't think investment alone is going to change the character. We're 3/4 the way there. And I would take this at the start of the season. If you offer me this position right now, hands down, I think Europa League, good position, Champions League football, virtually guaranteed. That's pretty good.
There is a kind of I've seen on some online forums today that if United, well, they will qualify for the Champions League, the Glazers won't sell because that's money. So they're going to get the money in. Of course, there's a debate going on in West Ham whether they, get rid of their coach, David Moyes, and focus on staying up or focus on winning in Europe. So there is that debate for them as well. What did they do? So most West Ham say, look, even if we don't stay up, we can rebuild and come back up. But winning Europe is vital. So it's a kind of a, again, for sponsorship, for money, for momentum, it's extremely important. And get the players in because they'll be up another higher level in Europe next year. Of course, there is a big game tomorrow. Spurs are in action. But of course, the table as it stands, Arsenal are well out of top. They have the league wrapped up. 29. Well, they will play in City soon, but they still have this title wrapped up. Call it. That's it. Done. City have this. Arsenal have this, not City. City are in second place. There's no one going to catch them. Newcastle in third, Man United in fourth, and Spurs hanging on in fifth. They have a game extra played than United. But tomorrow's game, Iseult, after ending an era that was there with Conte, playing Everton, who are desperate for points. And Everton win tomorrow will lift them above. It'll actually lift them up into 13th place. Are the signs good for Spurs, or could this be a bit of a calamity?
I suppose we're looking at two teams who have both sacked their managers this year, and I think perhaps this year has been the busiest league to this point in terms of both sackings or leaving by consensus across the Premier League. It's just been crazy. I think Spurs will be more damaged goods at this point going into this match. I find it very difficult to understand what Conte was saying, obviously, in the rants that subsequently led to his leaving by agreement. They seem to hint to something quite, well, not even hint, blatantly set out some serious issues within the club. And I think that seeps into the mentality of players. They can come out one of two ways. They could come out and we can see a performance against a weak Everton side, essentially, who are fighting their own demons, and see us come out and try and make a point. But I think they're just, it in a weird way, I think, is easier to be in Everton's position than to be in Spurs. You're up so high that people go, okay, even if you have off games, you're still in that top half, you're there or thereabouts for European football. So there's no real negative consequence yet where anyone has turned on them and said, guys, you're near relegation, you need to be upping your game here. And I just think at the moment they're in a almost, or like a limbo between falling to the level they can potentially fall to due to mismanagement, due to lack of investment in players as opposed to stadiums, etc. And having players of such an ability that they're able to coast in or around 4th and 5th, which is, it's nearly a worse position to be in. And now I say that as someone who is spoiled with a team that are in the top half of the league. But from my perspective, I think Conte going, I don't think it could have gone on for much longer, because I think the damage it was doing in the changing rooms, clearly, when you get him on a microphone, it was quite evident the issues that were happening. And it somehow now seems reflective in our positive results. When he was off with his gallbladder and exercising that from his system, we were having positive results. And we were like, it was kind of becoming a running joke that, oh, Conte isn't on the sideline, Spurs are doing well. And now I'm kind of going, Conte wasn't on the sideline, Spurs were doing well. I'm concerned, to be very honest, because I don't know if there's been that injection of we're changing our manager because we're down at the bottom end of the league, kind of fire in the belly feeling. There's my psychoanalyzing Spurs. I've been doing this for a long time. It doesn't get any better. It's the same thing every few years. I think what'll be really interesting is if Spurs, and I love Poch, I think it's about seeing how Spurs go now, that we don't regress in our thinking with who comes in, and that we really think about a manager is not going to fix the situation in Spurs. It's about the investment.
Look, you could very soon have Jurgen Klopp, because after yesterday's thrashing 4-1, where of course they went a goal up and then conceded 4, Klopp,
poor playing rather than some awful performances. I don't know if he could have changed anything.
If he had moves forced upon him. Sadio Mane, one of them that he wanted to keep. He basically wanted to overhaul. He didn't want Nunez, but he was forced to take him as an investment. What we've discussed it before, I think Andrew and I have discussed it, that they are using, and make no bones about this, and the English media don't want to say this because they're a little bit nervous, they're using the Moneyball system in Anfield. So they're looking for moving players on. It doesn't, Moneyball, as much as people say, oh, well, Brentford and Southampton, they haven't won anything. They're not even financially stable. They have financial issues. But Moneyball doesn't really work in soccer. It doesn't really work in baseball. It works to a degree, but not to get you over to the next level. And it's been proved over and over again. Oakland A's are going to move. The one that were the epitome of Moneyball, they're going to move. Boston Red Sox used a version of Moneyball, but they also had a huge amount of money, so they could buy in the extra players and win. So there is that. We're going to move on from this. Of course, Brendan Rodgers sacked by Leicester. Brendan, who was a Slippy Gerrard away from winning a league title with Liverpool. Yes, Andrew. You're muted, so it's moot.
That was a very good point.
Sorry,
Thank you.
I don't know if this is breaking. I've just had a notification that Chelsea have sacked Graham Potter. I'll need to check on that full details, but I've had a little flash across the screen.
I think my point has been made about this season being
it's wild.
It has to be up there with the highest numbers at this point.
Yeah,
I think that's the 12th. I think that's the 12th Premier League manager to be fired already this season. I think it's 12 already. I'll check on that when we go to the break. But
it's just a case of like, if you don't do the business, you don't get done. So look, before we go on to Robin in a moment, just one thing that cropped up, and Isolt, of course, handled a brilliant interview with Kristen Worley. Kristen was on with myself and Keane. I think we were on together with Kristen. Good time ago. Of course, UK Athletics, and they've stepped in to ban transgender athletes from taking part in female competition. They're following on World Athletics. And one of the things that Kristen had messaged to me, and I did do a bit of a dive into this and have a look at what's going on. Seb Coe, or Septic as he is known to basically doesn't have friends, but basically he is going again for re-election to World Athletics. He is desperately in need of votes. The votes are not going to come from Europe because most of the Europeans want him out. They don't like his policies. America also is now tired of him because they want someone else that they can pay to give them events. But you're looking at Africa, Asia, and Middle East, where a lot of votes are. And by taking this stand, is putting him in the good books for conservative nations. That's not just Kristen, but a lot of people, even outside the transgender community, feel this is not good. We would rather start again. We'll have to touch on this course with we're going to speak about Kelly a little bit later, Kelly Harrington. Cian, it's not a surprise that transgender males who've transitioned to females are banned from female competition in athletics. Should there be a debate about it? Like, I mean, is it unfair to do this?
It's a very strange one. I mean, I suppose the most famous one of the last couple of years has been Caster Semenya. There has been so many questions about her over the last 4, 5, 6 years, her entire career, I'm sure. And she has been tested within an inch of her life. So that's probably the most famous of those. The most famous of those stories over the last number of years. It's definitely something that needs to be spoken about, and there needs to be things done about it. All right, it's definitely something that has come into the GA, of course, as we spoke about. I think it was about 6 months ago, and they had to act extremely quickly to try and put something together to try and iron out issues that cropped up about 6 months ago. So it's definitely something that every sport has to deal with, and has to deal with properly, and can't just brush it to one side and try and deal with it in 12 months time, 2 years time. It's something that's going to continue to happen over the next number of years. So it is something that every single sporting organization, no matter who they are, athletics or any other sport, needs to deal with, and they really need to start dealing with it immediately, and not just push it to one side, as I say.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Andrew, you stopped up. We'll get back in just a moment. Isolt, you're right. She is DSD, as in Caster Semenya.
Just to differentiate, just for the trans point, and that's just my political correctness.
No. Isolt,
that's fine. I'm happily corrected.
Isolt, on that, you had a superb chat that I was producing in the background, and it was wonderful, Kristen. And I know that even. No, I won't speak for you. I'll let you speak on this and let you give your opinion, because of course you are. We've joked before, said like, oh well, you're still a woman, and ha, and like, what's going to happen next when we're on air on the radio? It's not a joking matter. Just give us your take, your side, and your feelings, because of course you had a huge in-depth chat with Kristen, and I know for me and Cian as well, it was effective. It affected us.
Kristen was an absolute joy to speak to, but not just from the point of view of telling her story, but the way she goes about telling her story is absolutely fantastic, because she also is very, very open in trying to educate, but not in a way that you feel like at the end of it you have been educated, not in a condescending way, but the discussion is such an important discussion to have. I think my views, I always, and I think I discussed this with Kristen, at least I hope I did, we discussed certain sports. And in particular, one of the stories which I thought was most interesting from what she discussed with me was in relation to not UFC, my bad there. I generically refer to MMA occasionally as UFC. We discussed an MMA athlete who she was familiar with who has transitioned. And obviously with MMA, and I think this is just an illustrative point. In MMA, after certain fights, the athletes would be in front of the commission's doctor to ensure that there are no like unseen marks. You might have bites, scratches, anything that you wouldn't normally see through the standard like bra top and singlet or underwear that is being worn. And one of the commission's doctors was not able to instantly differentiate the trans athlete. So there was no huge physical disparity in terms of size or in terms of body shape. And I think that's one of the things that we often hear thrown about, that it's like, well, we can't change the skeletal characteristics of an athlete. And that may be true, but we also can't change the skeletal characteristics of a very tall cis woman. That's just their build. I think the discussion has to be a constantly evolving one. And I think that's one of the things that I learned, because I think people will harp back and say, well, the science says this, or we are being told that the advantages are retained. And I think one of the things Kristen spoke about so interestingly was about the fact that testosterone suppression also has a hugely negative effect in terms of you go off a cliff without having testosterone being introduced into your system, and if you're solely suppressing it. And it was something that when she's explaining it, you suddenly go, oh my God, so you're actually setting an athlete up to have, by suppressing certain factors, you're setting them up to failure and to go off a cliff edge in terms of their hormonal balancing, which is extremely damaging, especially when they're competing in sports, which, as we all know, by the level of training you have to undertake to compete in a number of sports, you are essentially putting your body through so much already. And then add in the fact that you're depriving your body of a hormone that it needs, irrespective of gender. Testosterone is a feature for both men and women. So it was just, the discussion, I think, needs to be a constantly ever evolving one. And if we want to talk about inclusivity in sport, it has to be across the board. And we just need to look better at how we approach these things. I think blanket policies are by their very nature triggering to groups. So if we say no and we do what SEBCO would like people to do and just constantly have a position that is exclusionary rather than a position that says, maybe in this instance this doesn't work, but let's look at how we can make sport more inclusive in other aspects. It's about looking at things in the round. And I think that's the really important thing. We can't simply set out blanket policies without either having it backed by the science or without being willing to discuss how we can come up with better solutions for sport. Because the fundamental tenet of sport is fairness. But fairness is also to do with inclusion and being able to have people participate. We can set in place boundaries and guidelines for how people participate. We do that already. We do it with weight classes in boxing. We do it with when we have team ages in sports. Even in New Zealand and underage rugby, they do have weight classing so that they don't have like your no child is 5 kilo, your 15 kilo child running up against your 25 kilo child who are the same age and would otherwise come into the same age category. So what we need to do is look at how we regulate sport in a way that encourages participation. Maybe we expand the groups and expand the way we approach these things, but that we also are willing to constantly keep the discussion evolving and to keep that line of communication. I sound like I'm going to be a therapist, but that line of communication, a marriage therapist, a line of communication open between sports governing bodies, participants, and potential future participants. Because if we cut off a group now, we are essentially saying into the future that group will always associate not being allowed to participate, and then at some point won't look to participate. And people will go, oh, well, why are there no trans athletes involved in X, Y, or Z? And it's because you've learned that exclusion is part of the policy of a sport, rather than, okay, let's approach this again in 5 years' time and have a discussion, or let's keep the channels open. Let's say I think that's the big thing. And Trans Visibility Day is unfortunately used as, and I don't just mean in sport, but across the board, while it's meant to be a day about visibility and inclusion, it is used as a day for people who have very, very negative views and very harmful views to take it as their opportunity to slate others online, probably in person, unfortunately, and it's used for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah, I think I do have issues with when it's like this, a set day.
Yeah. I hate Women's Day. I hate International Women's Day. I think it's ridiculous.
I
You get
listen,
cupcakes though.
Isolt,
I get
can't have it
cupcakes.
always, Isolt. You can't have it always. But anyway, but yeah.
And if we had said that now, there'd be war.
I've had a discussion with people about the fact that there's a Women's Council of Ireland. There's no, you don't have, it has to be across the board. I feel very strongly about these things, that they should be across the board, minus the cupcakes.
But what the cupcakes? Jeez, okay, I'll get you cupcakes. Before we meet, I'll buy cupcakes. Look, the one thing that my former professor of archaeology who's passed away, John Bradley, and we were sitting one day having a coffee or a cup of tea, I think it was, in sandwich, and we were looking up in the top floor above the library in UCD, and there was the equality studies, and he said to me, it'd be much better if you had inequality studies and it wasn't just about gender. And when I was then hosting events with the British Council in Moscow, there were times when we had gender parity and so on, but the people who were organizing it were saying, look, and some of the best scientists that we had, like female scientists, they said, we haven't been discriminated against, we can go ahead. If you really want, you can do it. It might be harder. But then you have to look and see where the balance is. For example, if they take time off for a family, if they take time off to get married, if they take time, even, for example, changing their name, like after marriage, means such a big thing because they have patents or they have academic articles, which then they have to, So in that sense, look, also, I mean, for Women's Day, it's a nightmare in Russia because it's like this big day and you have to buy flowers and cupcakes.
Are you mixing it up with Valentine's Day?
And every birthday and Christmas and every
no, Christmas is okay.
Occasion.
I'm okay with Christmas. I love Halloween except for the bangers and fireworks. I detest them. I would, if someone came along and started like letting off fireworks beside me, I'd literally get them and stuff them up his nose or her nose because they do dogs so much damage and horses damage and cows damage, me damage. But I detest it. But Women's Day in Russia is so over the top, and you have to buy flowers, and if you don't do it, then there's something, and you have to, as I say, you have to greet and congratulate for being a woman. I would congratulate someone who's transgender who transitioned because you have to actually work to be a woman.
And now we are going to transition to Stamford Bridge and some other fireworks going off over there.
Yeah, I think I'm going to leave. Good luck. Bye.
Okay, before we go to Robin, Keith, there is a quick statement if you want to read it out.
There is. Chelsea have just announced that Graham Potter has departed the club and he has agreed to collaborate with the club to facilitate a smooth transition. What does that mean? I don't know, obviously, to help them out during their Champions League quarter-final with Real Madrid. He was thanked for his efforts over the last, I think, 6 or 7 months he was in charge. So it's probably highly likely that he was probably going to leave the club. There's been murmurings for the last probably 2 months that this was going to happen. My first question would be, why did they give Graham Potter the job if they were going to sack him after 6 months? I know Chelsea under the previous regime were very trigger happy, but I do honestly feel, why was he given the job? And given I know you have to be given the opportunity, obviously enough, but given the job, if they were going to pull the trigger this quickly into his, I think he signed a 3-year contract. So this quickly into the contract. So it'll be interesting to see what they do until the end of the season. Or will they try and bring someone in for the end of the season into next season?
Money. That's it. They're down 11th place in Europe. They're going to lose money and they want to get him out. It'd be cheaper to get him out now.
Fair enough.
It's stupidity. But anyway, okay, we're going to go straight out into the chat with Robin Parisotto. Of course, first part last week, he discussed how he got into working with anti-doping and setting up the EPO test and so on. And now we're going to speak about his book, why he wrote the book, and his take on what comes next and what's going to happen next in terms of doping. Is going to shock you because it's shocked the hell out of me. So we're going to sit back, watch this, and come back in just a few minutes and discuss it. What I always like, also like just to comment on with the children, of course, I find it's ultimately child abuse, and we mentioned it
Well,
just off air
yes.
about that with the Kamila Valieva, the Russian skater, where we had railed against her coach, her parents, and her guardians for allowing this to happen. That she was so ill, she needs a heart medicine to get on the ice. Look, heart medicine's fine. There's a lot of kids who have to take it. A friend of mine was told he had a hole in his heart as a kid. He'd never be able to play, but he was had to take medicine to regulate it. But he wasn't like a superstar player, but still he was able to take part, which all kids should be allowed to do. But that kind of element of child abuse, it just seems so prevalent, Robin.
Well, I anecdotally, it does seem prevalent. I guess a few years ago when the meldonium, sort of scandal sort of broke apart, and a few people tested positive, and Sharapova, wasn't it? She was the one that was found positive.
That was a big one, yeah.
And then they suddenly found that there was hundreds and hundreds of cases, but they couldn't prosecute it because it wasn't on the banned list previous to that. So, yeah, there obviously were a lot of people following the trend at the time that meldonium was the drug of choice, and I assume that sort of thing still happens. It flies under the radar, and unfortunately, over the past few years, the anti-doping agencies around the world have their resources to try and attack and make significant inroads into this problem have been drastically reduced, for one thing or another, COVID, etc. So I wouldn't be surprised that doping is even more widespread now because of what's happened over the last few years. The eye's been taken off the ball, so to speak.
This is it's something with the meldonium thing. I mean, even it hasn't stopped because just a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, an Irish Gaelic footballer, an amateur player, was caught doping, and he's like, I think he's 36, 37, like this veteran player, with meldonium in his blood, and it's just it's in Moscow and in the Baltics especially, it's the gym rat's drug of choice, because they say it gives you an enormous boost for 3 hours. And Robin, I've admitted this before, I trafficked it, not intentionally. No, intentionally I did, but I didn't know what the effects were. I brought it to a tennis player, the one that I worked with, I managed. Her mom said it's a kind of an immuno booster. And I read about it and said, yes, it's like if people get congested, if they get like hay fever, if they're ill, if they get colds, and it'll help decongest, it'll help the blood flow better. My the great grandmother of my son was taking it, and I thought, okay, so maybe that's okay. And it wasn't on the ban list. It wasn't on the ban list. But stepping on from that, Robin, in 2010, you published a book, Blood Sports: The Inside Dope on Drugs and Sport. Having read it twice, there is a focus on cycling. There's a focus on Lance Armstrong, for example, but it goes way beyond that. Two questions. What inspired you to write a book? And, well, it's kind of obvious what inspired you. It was like the whole mess you're working in. But what inspired you to write a book? And when is part 2 coming out?
Yeah. Look, the main motivation for writing the book was, I guess, not 6 months after the Olympic Games. We were directed to stop doing all of the research that we'd been conducting at the Institute of Sport prior to the Sydney Games, on the basis that we were, the AIS was an organisation preparing athletes for sport, so it couldn't be seen to be in the business of developing anti-doping tests for athletes, which was, completely hypocritical, because up until the Sydney Olympic Games, we had been pressed hard by our own government to come up with a test for EPO for the Sydney Games. And then to suddenly, in a sense, stab us all in the back, not 6 months after the games, was a bitter pill to swallow in a sense. And I guess for a while I was, quite despondent, despaired, because I had huge plans going forward from the Sydney Games. And in fact, we'd been awarded another research grant from the WADA for another $1.5 million US to develop tests for other synthetic hemoglobin or synthetic EPOs that were on the horizon. So we were ready to move forward. And in association with the pharmaceutical companies themselves. So it was a very complementary relationship that we had developed, and we thought was the way forward in the future, because at the same time a drug was developed, we could also have a test coming out side by side when that drug was released. So I guess in a sense, after having had to swallow that bitter pill, and eventually leaving the AIS, I guess I probably had a little bit of a hole in a sense. And I guess one way of working through it was to, I guess, bring it out in some form, and blood sports was the form that it took. And once I actually finished writing it, I must say, I did feel a lot better, because I actually got to say a lot of things that I'd actually been withholding for, or at least 4 or 5 years. As far as part 2 is concerned, I have thought about it, but getting the motivation up to do it is another thing. I guess one of the reasons I say that is because I don't get a great sense that the general population out there have anti-doping as a very high priority in their lives, and only very few athletes, shout from the rooftops to say I'm against doping. So really, where is that support, that groundswell, that how can I put it? Defense of anti-doping. There is none. It's just sort of say, oh, well, whatever happens, happens, And sometimes I feel like I'm just shouting out into the voids, and quite a few of my colleagues have felt the same, and to the point now where they're not even involved in anti-doping in any shape or form whatsoever. I guess every now and again I come up above the parapet and have my say, but ostensibly I'm not involved in any anti-doping processes or practices or organisations, and I've certainly not been approached since 2016 after my involvement in the IAAF database. Of course, there was probably a black label put over myself by every anti-doping organisation, because of my strong views and my conviction that it's something that needs, if you're going to do it well and do it transparently. And if you're not going to do that, then there's no trust to be gained from it, and certainly not from me, and certainly not from the public.
It's something that we had interviewed different people from different sports, and the failings in governance, for example, from protection of children, protection of athletes, anti-doping, anti-corruption, anti-match fixing, and so on, doesn't seem to register really, because a lot of the times, as we hear, we discussed it, and we see it, that most of the people, the consumers of sport, don't care. They want the show, and they want the show to go on, and they want the show to go on faster, louder, bigger, stronger, better. So people who say, wait, hold on, there's a lot long-term damage in this. This could be dangerous. We're speaking about the physical effects, of course, Robin, of doping and EPO and so on. You've seen the inside. You've known the anecdotes that are told, and many of them are actually case studies, almost in a way. What about the mental toll that doping takes on a person? Because for me, that's something that seems to be either under discussed or completely ignored.
Yes. Look, the athletes who dope must be in a constant battle with their own minds as to, should you dope or should I dope? And what should I dope with? How often should I dope? When should I stop doping? So they're in this constant swirl in their brains about doping. Versus someone who's not doping, they don't have to worry about those things. And I guess after years and years of doing that, look, I don't know whether anyone's actually ever examined something like that, but that's a really interesting question. What I will say is that I remember Tyler Hamilton, the American cyclist who tested positive at the Athens Games. And then when he wrote his book, I can't remember the title of the book, but what he felt by admitting to what he'd done was such a mental relief for him. This release made him feel so much better about himself. And I guess that's one example I can give you, that shows that there is a constant battle, mental battle, to maintain doping, to maintain a facade, but also at the same time, if it was exposed, then they'd probably feel so much better for it.
I agree. I read the book that The Secret Race. Isn't that the one? The Secret Race, the Tyler Hamilton book.
Sorry, I just had
one. Okay. So the Secret Race, I think was the name of it. I could be wrong.
Yes.
Because for me, I always, having spoken with people who doped and dealt with people who are kind of in recovery in a real sense, someone said to me, I've never tried it, not this, but this is someone who had doped for many, many years, competed 2 Olympic Games, and never tested positive, despite taking, at least a dozen tests leading up to and even during Olympic Games, those 2 Olympic Games. And he said that, I've never tried it, but you know what? I think it must be like doping, because once you get on, you can't stop. And this person likened it to cosmetic surgery. Especially we see it where people, you get Botox, they get their faces frozen and so on. And it's just a non-stop cycle of trying to cheat time, cheat nature, cheat themselves. And this person said that when they eventually retired, they had a very severe mental breakdown, because they just physically, because especially they were using a lot of painkillers to get through events and training, and physically they just broke down completely. Well, to wrap up on this, how far are we from kind of limiting or defeating or even minimizing the scourge of doping in sport? Are we closer? Or are we further away since the mid 2010s, when Russia was exposed for state-sponsored, state-organized doping?
Yeah, look, I'll try and crystal ball this best as I can, but look, in this day and age, it's very unpredictable where it's going to go. There's been so many libertarian policies or positions, or that in 2023 we probably thought even only a few years ago were impossible. The thing that I guess I've focused on, and in part in my book, was the prospect of gene doping, and not only the physical effects of genetic doping, but also the philosophical aspects of genetic doping, because you're going to get to a point where it will cross over into society in general, and therefore it'll make its way into sport. If a person has either a medical condition or wants to be enhanced in some way, and that can be done through genetic technologies, then a person who is an athlete who may have a condition or just wants to enhance their performance may also want to partake in that. And if they're not allowed to, then it could come down to some sort of issue of human rights. Well, an athlete could say, well, that John over there can, why can't I? Just because I play sport. That's where I think the arguments are going to come up in the future. And once that happens, it's going to become such a grey area. It's going to become such a nebulous mess that how are you going to negotiate that? It's really difficult, and almost scary in a way, what may or may not happen in the future, particularly in relation to genetic doping. And, it comes back to doping in general anyway, but with genetic doping, it adds this new dimension, which people probably are not thinking about now and may not think about for a while. Probably because genetic doping is still really in its infancy anyway. But the basic technology is there. It's just the application that needs to be executed where it will be effective and, essentially probably undetectable for a while. So we may see genetically enhanced athletes in a not too distant future, and it may well be an accepted part of society in the future. Who knows?
On that kind of depressing note, and I'm kind of seeing Terminator and seeing all these sci-fi movies rolled out. Yeah, I don't know what to expect. I want you to bring out part 2 of the book, because I think there is an audience for it. I do believe that the people who hold firm to the belief that doping is not a healthy thing, doping is not leveling the playing field, it's messing up generations to come, as we've seen from birth defects to health issues and mental issues. It's something that needs to be stamped out and stopped. Robin Parisotto, thank you so much for your time, and have a great evening in Canberra.
Thank you very much, Alan. It's been a pleasure to talk to you and to talk to your audience.
And of course, we're back after that, and hope you enjoyed the second part. There's an awful lot to chew over on that. For me, listening to him, because he didn't see me on camera, the camera focused on him. It was very difficult to try and kind of put all the things together. There was a lot of it that we did speak of the mental issues surrounding doping, which you've always brought up, and especially when you're using heavy steroids and hormones that do change structures and affect the brain. Isa, I'll start with you on this very, very quickly. You just a couple of points of going to Keane. What struck you from the second part of it? For me, everything from the mental issues to gene doping, the whole thing.
The gene doping aspect is really, really interesting. There've been a lot of articles on it, and it still, I think, is largely described as a hypothesis, because we haven't seen it obviously yet in terms of actual athletes being raised as something athletes were doing. There were 2 things actually that really, really struck me, though, however, that I'm going to mention briefly. The first was between last week's interview part 1 and this week's, we had the reallocation of some medals from the London 2012 cleanest games known to man. I say that with absolutely no sincerity, but there was a reallocation of medals this week, and I think that brings us back to the point of Robin's time involved with when testing was obviously being ramped up in the idea of we're going to stop doping in sports. We're going to really look at things like EPO, and we're going to take huge, big steps in relation to it. And then we kind of see that even just this week, we're looking back again and going, 2012, we now are upgrading medal results, as obviously athletes in the interim have been retrospectively had their medals taken from them. So it's just been, it's a continuous, we're looking at constantly looking in the past to see how anti-doping measures have not successfully kept the sanctity of the sport there. And I just think dopers are always going to be one step ahead. And it was, The Secret Race is a brilliant read for anyone who's looking for it. The other thing I think which was quite interesting was when Robin made the point, and perhaps this is less to do with doping, but to do with what Robin actually, just the way he worded it, about how do we get to a point where we're in a quagmire of questions about, if we say to one athlete, you can't do this, and yet someone else can do it in their normal life. Well, to an extent, with DSD athletes and athletes with testosterone suppression, we're already asking people to do something different to participate in sports. So I think we've already reached that. And that is, the way he put it was, oh, then do we get into a question about what's fairness? And it's sort of like, we're getting into ethical questions if we start to say what people can do in one realm, they can't in another. There's a difference between saying to someone, you can't take a certain medication that may enhance your performance. But when we get to a stage where we say you can't take a certain treatment, then are we going into a very different area, different to saying to athletes you can't rehydrate with IVs, which is a big thing obviously in combat sports. But I think there's a lot of ethical and moral questions will continue to become more prevalent with doping as the methods of doping evolve and come closer to a medical intervention than they are what we would strictly in our head see as, you get doping, take the tablet, you get bigger, take the tablet, you go faster, take EPO.
Yeah. Well, look, EPO is a medical substance, and it enhances performances, but it's highly dangerous. Used well, as Robin said, it really works. Also, for medical intervention, we also see with asthma medicine, the inhalers.
Yeah,
it's medical. And it's kind of like, well, hold on.
I think the gene aspect is such, because the genes is your fundamental being.
Yeah. Cian, just wrap up this because we want to go to Kelly Harrington. So, what was your big takeaway from what Robin had to say?
I suppose the biggest question I would have is, how far is gene doping actually? Is it actually happening already? It's not been spoken about. But are there any sporting organizations already beginning to do this? It's actually terrifying to hear that, because as you've already alluded to, if it starts, are we going to have the Tommy Tiernan version of the Olympics in the next 8 years where everything is allowed and we see where we end up? So that was probably the one thing that really stood out for me. How far is it actually away, or has it actually begun already? Definitely something to be looked at closely. Into the future.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I started thinking, with my own kids, maybe I should have fixed their genes to make them, bigger, faster, and stronger. So
the only genes I'll ever have will be denim ones. That's
Gene doping is a horror show. Well said by you all and the guests. Okay, thank you very much. We're going to one quick thing to play out, because of course we have the whole Kelly Harrington incident. This is, of course, the Irish Olympic gold medalist. With an interview promoting a sponsor, Spar, the supermarket chain, known in Europe as Eurospar. She's their ambassador, and Kelly, of course, comes from the inner city of. Part of Dublin. Was just there actually yesterday. And she is lesbian, and she is very well spoken young woman. She's very intelligent, very thoughtful. I don't think she's a great fighter. She's a decent fighter. She's not well, but she gets the job done. She's very successful. She's been interviewed to start the promotion for this, and then this happens. So just sit back and enjoy. We're going to comment in a minute because we only got a few minutes left. So we'll play this out just to get everyone's reaction.
You're talking there, Kelly, as well. We're kind of discussing the idea of role models, and I know this is probably an area that you've been thrust into because of your talent and your success. And given that, and given all of the diversity as well in the North inner city now, is something that's cropped up in recent years as well. I know you've had a number of interactions on social media and on Twitter that have suggested you've strongly held views on immigration. Are those opinions you still feel strongly about?
I don't actually. I switched off there when you said diversity in the inner city. There's diversity all over Dublin, so I did switch off. So I don't actually know what the rest of the question was there. Sorry.
No, just talking about. I know you had a couple of interactions on social media, on Twitter in October, where you were talking about anti-immigration, and there was a quote tweet from a GB News tweet where there were links between violence and immigration and migrants. And I know on social media, I guess, in your position as a role model, those comments carry weight. So I was just wondering if you have still the same held views on immigration.
So I feel right now at the moment that you're trying to hang me out to dry. So for that, I'll say next question.
Well, not at all. The discussion, I guess, Kelly, just needs to be had.
Yeah, that was a post in October, so I do feel like you are hanging me out to dry, and you know me by now, and you know you're going to get the truth off me, and that's exactly the truth as it is, as I'm sitting here now. I feel like you've brought that up to try and bring up a bit of controversy.
Certainly not. People will know it's not my style. It's not my style to look for controversy or to quote controversy. I genuinely just feel if anyone posts anything on social media or says something in an interview, those are beliefs that are strongly held and thought out.
That was in October. Like you said, it was in October. Like, we're now nearly heading into April.
Hi, Shane. Just to cut in there, we've probably about 5 minutes left if we maybe want to move on to the next one.
Yeah, no, it's an issue.
No, I totally understand it's a question and you have to ask it and everything, but
probably best.
Yeah, it's probably best to move on from it.
Is it not right that we have the discussion? I guess, Kelly, is my point.
Is that what you want to waste the time on, though? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's so many other questions that you could ask me. I'm not a politician. You know what I mean? I'm.
But why is it time waste? And I know, you're, as I said at the outset, you're an ambassador to young people and to people, and these are views that some people would see as controversial when it comes to immigrants. I would argue, speaking personally, that welcoming immigrants into our country can add so much to the culture of Dublin,
that's
to
what
Ireland.
You would argue. That's what you would argue, and that's fine.
But is that not fair?
I'm not having that argument with you. I'm not even open to the discussion with you.
Probably best. I think, guys, it's probably best to move on. To be honest, we're here today for SPAR and their media event, which Kelly is an ambassador for. So maybe if we want to pop in another question or two and move on from it.
Yeah, and the SPAR slogan and I read it out at the start, was to back local communities to drive positive change and impact. So is it not a fair question then to?
You're like a dog with a bone.
Well, no, Kelly. But the point is, you were saying there that you felt I was hanging you out to dry when that's completely not the intention of my question. The question is just to bring up a discussion on people having views on social media and backing them up.
Here we go. Right, if you're not hanging me out to dry, let it go. Move on. Be like Elsa and just let it go. Do you know what I mean? Don't hold it back anymore. Just let it go and move on.
I don't feel like it's my job to ask questions, Kelly.
I know it's your job, and you've asked, and I've responded, and I've told you. Next question. Like, I'm not here to answer those questions. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not here to talk about politics. Like, if I wanted to do that, I'd go and I'd do a degree in politics. But
no, but you've put these views forward on social media. Does that not allow them open to be questioned?
I think Kelly has said that she doesn't really want to talk about it.
Now, there is a bit more of that interview that plays out, just another 15, 20 seconds, but it's more the same. I have to say, no, Iseult and Keane will give their take on it. I'll just preface and say that, Kelly, I've met her only once or twice. Shane, I've met him, I think, once. Both fine people. The performance from both, not great. She could have handled it a lot better. The PR person should get it fired, actually, because to put your client into that is an awful situation, and she let herself down, she let her client down, she let the whole show down. But also and I will say the bollocksology on display from Shane Hannon is an embarrassment, because a journalist doesn't need to do that. There's a rule in politics: you ask the question once, you ask the question twice, and you move on. If you don't do that, it's grandstanding, it's looking to show how great you are. Iseult, as a boxing person on the panel, what's your take on it? How did you read it?
I suppose one of the first things I'd say is I think the impression I got, and from listening back to the interview at the time and from listening to what Off the Ball had to say about it, I actually think the PR person involved was there for Spar, as opposed to it being Kelly's own PR person, in which case their interest is Spar, who unfortunately, and I think, I'm going to say this, I'm a huge Kelly Harrington fan, and I'm going to also say that I don't think Shane Hannon was doing anything wrong in asking the question. Perhaps if the PR person hadn't involved and said, like, the way the responses given led to him re-asking it, which also led to it getting to a situation where she's refusing to answer the question, the PR person becomes involved and he explains why he's asking the question at that point, which I do understand, because I don't think he's that sort of tough go-getter kind of interviewer even, who will actually go and try and rip someone to shreds. I think the difficulty here is twofold. When you put something out, and we can't look at this without looking at what we've previously said about athletes have a platform, and when they use their platform, they have to be liable for the consequences of doing so. It's not a case of this is something which happened a week ago and she hasn't had an opportunity to prepare with a PR professional or with someone in relation to this question may come up in an interview. Here's how you deal with it, or here's how you deal with it in a way that is better than how it was dealt with. Because that's not giving an answer, which leads to another question, which led to exactly what happened and what we just saw. There are two things on the aspect of when you have a platform. The difficulty here was that Kelly didn't just retweet or like a post, which can happen to us all. Like, I have liked pictures belonging to people where I'm thinking, God, you look awful there. And I hit the wrong button and I'm thinking, God, I want to get by that. And you do these sorts of things. It's reactionary. It doesn't necessarily constitute an endorsement. When you retweet something and comment on it, then you leave yourself open to the consequences. And deleting something after the fact, when you're in that sort of public profile and that higher public profile, is often too little too late. You're going to be asked questions in the future. How you respond to those questions can be prepared in advance. You have the opportunity. So saying I'm not a politician when you have a public platform isn't a good enough answer. But equally, the way it was handled, I don't think Shane and I don't think Kelly made it as bad as the PR individual or executive who got involved. The thing to say there would be, look, can you give us a minute? I just want to have a quick word. I appreciate this live interview, but we weren't prepared for this type of questioning, and it is something we need to be able to discuss, because unfortunately for Spar, who obviously are running the campaign, their campaign is around community. And if you have, at the moment, we have a very difficult position in Ireland where there is a huge amount of anti-immigration sentiment. And unfortunately, you would be a poor journalist if you didn't look into someone's history of comments on an issue that is so topical. And it's unfortunate on Kelly's part that, as she said herself subsequently, she had retweeted something and commented on it without looking fully into the backstory and appreciating the person who had initially sent out this tweet and their views on certain things. But she also commented in it about how maybe our politicians should think about things. And you kind of go, well, then you've opened a political dimension. You can't, you've essentially, the rabbit is out of the hat. It's too little too late. I think it's very disappointing from all sides, because it's disappointing that Kelly has been placed in this position, because she is such a remarkably good example on so many other levels. And this is just a very unfortunate situation. These things happen. I think it could have been dealt with much better. And I also think there is absolutely no excuse between October, when this original tweet went out, and March of this year, not having a pre-prepared answer to deal with this. And I have no issue with someone having a pre-prepared answer. Our politicians get the opportunity to have questions in the Oireachtas submitted in advance so they can answer them. So you have this opportunity. If Spar are concerned about something in the background, which they should be aware of, they should say you should have the good grace to expect any journalist worth their salt to have done some research to say, can you give me any potentially sensitive questions now? We don't want Kelly to be caught on the hop, because this is an interview about sports, but we appreciate there may be questions on other areas, just so we can run through them.
I agree on that. The one thing that sort of struck me was there was an element of class bias in this, and that's from, I'm looking at it. This is like with her accent, where she's from, female. There was a kind of a dig on that.
I suppose I agree to an extent, but I also think there was also an element of, I don't think she helped herself with the comment about be like Elsa and let it go.
No,
like this
no,
serious
no.
issue.
You
So
can't.
that also inflamed the situation.
Yeah, like no matter where it was at the end, but it still was a really churlish, really stupid thing to do. It was really childish and a little bit arrogant to come out with that. But the one thing with these guys went off the ball, they're the biggest, we call in the business, fluffers. So they'll get someone on who they know there's something horrific about, but they'll sit there and be, oh, you're so good. Can you sign my book? Can you like get a selfie with me? There is that element as well. And you know, and I'm being critical because I've been in the same situation myself, kind of going, you know, do I ask the hard question or not? But you sometimes have to. You know, sorry, Liesl.
Oh no, I totally agree. And I think I saw someone commented online that it was like when Ger Gilroy of Off the Ball interviewed Lance Armstrong, and Lance. It was a Jew said it. It was very. It was extremely, like, that interview was entirely argumentative. But I think the difficulty with this one is Lance is Lance. Kelly is a woman who has given a huge amount of inspiration to so many young boxers, both female and male, in our country. And I think you have to also give someone the benefit of the doubt, but give them, there is no, the biggest issue I have with this interview, and again, it really falls down on that no one had this discussion with her. Like, what is wrong with your PR people? I can tell you, and I'm not going to name, but I'm not going to name the people, but I know of several people who are involved actually in the sports journalism side as opposed to in the athlete side, who have had people professionally scrub anything they might have put online in the past, even if it was innocuous, if it was like liking a certain thing, because you have to.
The worst thing is it comes into a narrative, and that narrative is good. And this is what I didn't like about it. It was the gotcha moment. We got someone, and now everyone's going to share and talk. The same as with a Sinn Féin politician puts up a picture with Gardaí evicting, like Irish police evicting people.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
It's a reworking of an art.
I wouldn't do it, but the reaction to it was so expected from the same quarters, the same people who would love to have flags in their bio, and they all jump in on it and go, how dare she? It's like, and with this, it was the same. It was this, and this is why I didn't like how they did it. They got it. They could have just put that away and say, listen, it's okay. But this is for attention. With Lance Armstrong, when they went and they did the thing where they're trying to be silent. They never asked him any hard questions. And then they were like silent. Then Lance Armstrong goes, hello? I'm sorry, that's an embarrassment. That's trying to, you know, as a good interviewer, you need to move things along. But they wanted attention, and they're being tough, and they were being. So anyway,
the only other point I would say, and I think it echoes what you've just said, because you're just after reminding me of the other point I had forgotten, is that particularly at a time when there are some really upsetting scenes in relation to anti-immigration stuff in Ireland and in the UK, I think asking that sort of question of someone with such a high profile can almost have the negative. It's not just the gotcha moment. It can also make people go, oh God, that's her view, when I don't think it is.
No.
But in doing so, you're fueling a fire of, like, she will become a poster person for these awful
She's a martyr.
people.
She's a martyr. There was I put
and
a
it's
video.
not her fault for that.
No,
I don't think
definitely
that's
not.
If you look at the people who were piling in against her, they were the same arseholes who'd pile in on whoever it is, because now I can get some likes and people reshare me and so on. The people who will then say you can't even say something, you can't think something, it's thought police. They're the people who you need to say, listen, let's have an honest discussion about immigration. Let's speak about the issues. Let's see. Let's hold the government to account of why Irish people are not looked after, and then let's see what we go next. So let's first get our, like, step by step. But those people see, you see, if Kelly Harrington is being picked on, and she's an Olympic, and she's a lesbian, and she's a woman, and she's from Dublin, none of us are safe. And again, like you said, Issa, that's actually perfect. I thank you for bringing it up, because I'd have missed. Cian, very quickly onto you. Sorry.
No bother at all. No problem. No, but Shane Hannon was piled on as well immediately afterwards. I think I saw it today or yesterday. There was a tweet brought up and from 2010 he put out, I think, about Fernando Torres, and that was brought up. There was a couple of other things dredged up. It's amazing how quickly the pylon happens. It only it does happen, but it's amazing how quickly these pylons happen and how much focus is put on all of these situations. It's absolutely amazing. We don't seem to think. We'll like a photograph, we'll put in a comment. We don't think of the consequences afterwards. I'm sure both people had thoughts about it. I'm sure Kelly Harrington, as soon as the camera went off, the microphone was switched off, went, yeah, didn't really handle that very well, very, very well. I'm nearly certain she knows herself and Shane Hannon knows that got out of control, and it probably got out of control a little bit quicker than the two of them probably thought it would.
Yeah. And the PR person didn't help as well with that.
Definitely not. No, stay quiet.
Kelly Harrington did release a statement about it. Now, she's been silent on this. I think a lot of people just would have ignored it. But again, this is what media does. And a lot of people involved with women's rugby then started piling on her as well. She was their hero, but this is the whole thing. People are gobshites. They're stupid. You're their hero. We love you. And suddenly they hate you because you did something that you're not supposed to do, or at least we're told you're not supposed to. And it's insane. She said very, very quickly, last October, I reposted a tweet and video from a journalist whom I didn't know at the time, detailing the story of a young girl in France who was kidnapped and murdered. Moved by the horrific circumstances of this story, I reposted a video of this journalist together with a copy of the quote. My thoughts in that moment were of the young girl and not any political opinion. Okay. She goes on to say, as a sporting role model, I'm aware that I need to be mindful of what I do and say. I reacted with my emotions and without the facts. How this came across is not reflective of me as a person or my thoughts. She said she wasn't prepared for it, that the question asked was not definitive. Again, a good journalist would ask the question properly to get the answer. An answer wasn't needed because it was better for her to act like a fool and say, like, let it go, like that's perfect for what they wanted, because it shows her up to be some, up her own backside woman, and she ends up saying that, since the interview, I have seen some comments that I feel I should address and make my feelings and thoughts clear. As a sportswoman, I am proud to say I am all about community, inclusion, and diversity. Before we go away, Issa, I'm so sorry you got the Portobello. Can I just ask you very quickly, how's it end for Kelly?
It'll be forgotten about. It'll take a while, take another couple of weeks, but it will be forgotten about. Look, we've all had those situations. We mightn't have it in public in that sort of a forum, but we've all had those awkward moments. It will be forgotten. Might take a little bit of time for that to happen.
Iseult?
To an extent, I agree, but I also disagree. So I suppose today she put out another further comment where she was saying she's going to take some time offline as a result of all of this. SPAR have obviously said they're sticking by her as one of their ambassadors, and in a poll in one of our newspapers, 40% of people agreed with her position. Now, they weren't very clear in the question as to whether it was her position in not, it was more so her position, in not answering the question.
Right, okay.
As opposed to her position in terms of not the comment, but also in terms of her position as regards how she dealt with the answer. Subsequently, obviously, the comments about let it go. But I just think there will be a certain element, a very nasty element in Ireland, will use her as a face of a few things. And Kelly Harrington agrees with our view on this, that, and the other. Which is unfortunate, because I think she comes from an area that is quite diverse, and it'd just be a pity if she's used by the wrong people in that manner.
I think from both sides she's going to be battled around.
Yeah, from both sides completely.
Yeah. And that's the very, very sad thing. And on that note, I'll say that we had a lot of comments. Sorry, you have to see this, by the way. Arthur Rhoda, he's of course an Everton fan. He said, Miss Cody, get ready tomorrow for tears for Spurs, as Everton will win. Everton 3, Spurs 1 is a bear pit at Guzman Park. On that note, I'll say
no better way to finish.
There you go, Mr. Cody. Thank you very much. Take care. Cian McGivney, thank you very much again, and take care.
No bother at all. No problem.
And on that note, folks, we will go out for another week. Back, of course, next Sunday. I will be in a different location next Sunday. So there you go. So I'm moving around the world and bringing you all the news of the day. So until next week, you take care of yourselves and each other. I'm on board. And thank you for joining us this evening.